Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. Habits, Part 4, from Sri Aurobindo. The subconscious is the evolutionary basis in us. It is not the whole of our hidden nature, nor is it the whole origin of what we are. But things can rise from the subconscious and take shape in the conscious parts, and much of our smaller vital and physical instincts, movements, habits, character forms has this source. There are three occult sources of our action: the superconscious, the subliminal, the subconscious. But of none of them are we in control or even aware. What we are aware of is the surface being, which is only an instrumental arrangement. The source of all is the general nature, universal nature, individualizing itself in each person. For this general nature deposits certain habits of movement, personality, character, faculties, dispositions, tendencies in us, and that, whether formed now or before our birth, is what we usually call ourselves. A good deal of this is in habitual movement and use in our known conscious parts on the surface. A great deal more is concealed in the other unknown three, which are below or behind the surface. The subconscious is a thing of habits and memories, and repeats persistently, or whenever it can, old suppressed reactions, reflexes, mental, vital, or physical responses. It must be trained by a still more persistent insistence of the higher parts of the being to give up its old responses and take on the new and true ones. The vital is a good instrument, but a bad master. If you allow it to follow its likes and dislikes, its fancies, its desires, its bad habits, it becomes your master, and peace and happiness are no longer possible. It becomes not your instrument or the instrument of the divine Shakti, but of any force of the ignorance or even any hostile force that is able to seize and use it. This yoga can only be done to the end by those who are in total earnest about it, and ready to abolish their little human ego and its demands in order to find themselves in the divine. It cannot be done in a spirit of levity or laxity. The work is too high and difficult. The adverse powers in the lower nature too ready to take advantage of the least sanction or the smallest opening. The aspiration and tapasya needed too constant and intense. It cannot be done if there is a petulant self-assertion of the ideas of the human mind, or willful indulgence of the demands and instincts and pretensions of the lowest part of the being, commonly justified under the name of human nature. It cannot be done if you insist on identifying these lowest things of the ignorance with the divine truth, or even the lesser truth permissible on the way. It cannot be done if you cling to your past self and its old mental, vital, and physical formations and habits. One has continually to leave behind his past selves and to see, act, and live from an always higher and higher conscious level. It cannot be done if you insist on freedom for your human mind and vital ego. All the parts of the human being are entitled to express and satisfy themselves in their own way at their own risk and peril, if he so chooses, as long as he leads the ordinary life. But to enter into a path of yoga, whose whole object is to substitute for these human things the law and power of a greater truth, and the whole heart of whose method is surrender to the divine Shakti, and yet to go on claiming this so-called freedom, which is no more than a subjection to certain ignorant cosmic forces, is to indulge in a blind contradiction and to claim the right to lead a double life. It is this idea that you are helpless because the vital consents to the wrong movement that comes in the way. You have to put your inner will and the mother's light on the vital, so that it shall change, not leave it to do what it likes. If one is to be helpless and moved by any part of the instrumental being, how is change possible? The mother's force or the psychic can act, but on condition that the assent of the being is there. If the vital is left to do what it likes, it will always go after its old habits. It has to be made to feel that it must change. It is the small habits of the lower vital being which gather all their strength to resist correction and try to occupy the consciousness. When they come, you must learn to detach your inner consciousness from them entirely, so that even when they strongly come, they will not be able to occupy the consciousness or get any assent. The vital in the physical easily slips back to its old small habits if it gets the chance. It is there that they stick. They go entirely only when that part gets equanimity and a simple, natural freedom from all desires. These habits of the physical vital are almost automatic in their action, and it takes either a very strong will or a persistent effort of self-discipline to get out this automatic, almost reflex action. You should not, therefore, be discouraged by the difficulty, but go on with the necessary perseverance of the will to press it out of existence. These things, hard forms of speech, anger, etc., are habits formed by the vital physical consciousness, and, as they are supported by the subconscious, very difficult to change. If one can conquer or change them by force of will, or mental or spiritual control, so much the better. But if one cannot do this at once, one must not be upset or think oneself unfit. It is easier for most to realize the divine or enter into the psychic consciousness than to change this part of the nature. But once the psychic consciousness governs or the higher consciousness descends, then it is much easier for these to go. You must not therefore be discouraged by these recurrences or persistences, but try always to stand back in an inner quietude, and if they come, let them pass away like a cloud across the light. In time, these things will be finally dealt with by the Force. The character is made up of habits, and it clings to them, is disposed to think them the very law of its being, and it is a hard job to get it to change at all, except under a strong pressure of circumstances. The main difficulty in the sadhana consists in the movements of the lower nature, ideas of the mind, desires and attractions of the vital, habits of the body consciousness that stand in the way of the growth of the higher consciousness. There are other difficulties, but these make the bulk of the opposition. You should realize that these periods of clouding are not due to any special incapacity or perversity in you. Even the best sadhaks have them. It is the difficulty of the human nature in getting transformed. This difficulty sometimes takes the form of a bad will in the vital somewhere, or a tendency in the physical to cling to old mistakes and old habits, or to shrink from the trouble of transformation. But in these respects you have made a great progress. What is there is the mechanical habit of the lower nature in general, mechanical, not voluntary, to repeat the old movements to which it has been or was quite recently accustomed when any strong wave of them comes in from the surrounding universal nature. This creates a kind of recurrence, of relapse, into the states which the spiritual progress is pushing out, and it is not easy to get rid of this recurrence altogether. The one thing, when they come, is not to get distressed or upset, to realize what it is, and to remain very quiet, calling for the Mother's force to push it away. In this way, the habit of these recurrences diminishes, the strength and intensity also, and on the other side one is able to recall the true consciousness and the true force, the bright, happy, peaceful, open condition more easily and quicker. One can then proceed on an assured basis to a more and more positive progress.